So I appreciate you joining us today, and I'm just absolutely delighted. Today we've got Kristina Quynn to help us figure out sustainable and reality-based writing practices. Kristina is at Colorado State University, and she is the director of CSU Writes. And VP for Research, Ellen Fisher, put the two of us in touch because she thought we could probably help each other plot and scheme. And this turns out to be true. And this is one of the first results of our plotting and scheming. And I'm pleased that we've reached the point to be able to offer this workshop. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kristina. Welcome.
Thank you, Julia. Yeah, it's always good to be plotting and scheming on such things, I think. So I'm going to go ahead and take the screen, and I've got a presentation. I'll talk for about 45, 60-ish minutes. I think we have around 90-ish total. I'd like to reserve about a third of our time together for questions. So you can feel free to use the chat if you want, but also to reserve those questions so that we can have a good Q&A and conversation at the end. But I'm delighted to be here. And virtually, although I'd love Albuquerque and New Mexico and would have traveled too. But those are future plottings and schemings. So as Julia mentioned, I'm here to talk a little bit about developing a sustainable and reality-based writing practice. And if you want to, this is kind of just a sense of our time together, but if you could pop into the chat, your name, department, and if you want to, your preferred writing barrier. I think we all have places where it is that we get stuck a little bit or stall out a little bit. And so those are common kind of, and we can call them our preferred barriers. And while I'll be able to see the chat and I'll look through and identify and see things, if you have questions, again, pop them in the chat. And if I don't catch them right away, then Julia can bring them to my attention. We will also use the chat 3 different times during our conversation or during the presentation, and that will cover questions 1, 4, and 5 on the reflection sheet that I sent out. It should also be in the chat. So if you didn't get the email, the workshop handout is in there, and then there's some reflection questions on who you are as a writer. We won't cover all the questions during our time together, but they're all important for you to be thinking about in relation to sustainable writing practices for yourself. And then feel free to pose questions in the chat. I love the other job duties, time and getting started. Is your preferred? Yep, time management. Yes. Awesome. Okay, so this is the handout. If you didn't get it, again, take a look in the chat. And Julie, if it needs to be reposted in the chat, maybe you can do that. Self-doubt kids email. Yes, multiple preferred. Yep. Mediative teaching. Yeah, thank you. Our session goals today are multiple, but we're really going to be talking about the context and giving you some strategies for engaging your writing projects amidst competing demands on your time and attention. And you can hear that even in the chat, right? What are the kind of our preferred barriers? And they are many, they are multiple. If I can advance this. There we go. One of the ways that we're going to approach this in kind of getting ourselves some context for talking about what's sustainable is we're going to talk about redefining writing. We're going to reconsider our projects that we have on our task list. We're going to value engaging writing rather than productivity. And this I'll talk a little bit about. I think that we can't talk about what's sustainable without also talking about discourses of productivity, pressures of productivity. And we'll talk about some base writing habits. And this is also in the handout. It's related to Helen Sword's approach to habit formation, and we'll talk more about that. But there's a little test in there, a little gauge in there that you can start filling out if you haven't already. And there's a resource share. And that's scattered throughout our presentation or the presentation so that you have access to additional resources, things that I've used in putting together programming for CSU Writes and some of the materials here today. But I just want you to be able to take some things with you and then be able to read further or engage further after our session. A little bit about me. I was trained as a literary critic and then did a sharp left or right, or somehow I zigged and zagged into research writing studies. And so that's where I'm now making my home. I'm also a program administrator, but a partner, a mother, a daughter, right? A friend, runner, gardener, I'm a reader, and I'm an idea and life enthusiast. Which means I have this whole host of things and projects that I want to engage in and do regularly. And that writing is one of those. It's a significant one. It's an important one. But it's one that's easily, as we know, with a lot of long-term life projects, it's easily put off. And if we're feeling anxious or we haven't built up some good habits and strategies to be doing our regular writing practice, it's easily deferred and put off. And so for me, being able to incorporate writing has just been crucial to me being able to live a satisfying career and personal life. A little bit about the program that I run at CSU, because it's relevant, I think, in our conversation here to think about how we're going to be talking about writing, is that it's really a professionally based writing program. It's not developmental in the same way that we think of things like writing centers or writing across the curriculum. This is really geared towards how it is that writers build their careers through writing. And we have 4 streams: grad rights, doc rights, faculty rights, and writing team rights. And Ellen Fisher has had a part in some scheming behind the scenes on playing with that one. But and I put this picture in there for you, Ellen. I think you might be able to see your former office there. But it's a program that serves all 8 colleges. And I think you can get a sense from the chat. And I know from your other participation in advance, I'm assuming that you've got multiple kind of colleges and departments and disciplines represented here, and that writing is part of all of our practices. And so in that's part of that kind of professional conversation and community that we can have and build on our college campuses around writing. The program itself is designed to focus on the 5 areas where research writers tend to struggle the most: space, time, energy, momentum, style, and collaboration. And we're going to be spending most of our time here talking about things like time and energy and momentum, a little bit less about style or collaboration or those kinds of things. But if you stop and think about how big these categories are, how simple these categories are, but they're also some of the things that can trip us up. And so when we talk about the base habits that Helen Sword will lay out for you, a lot of these are housed within there. It's like where it is that we're writing, when it is that we're writing. And they're so simple, but they are the things that can trip you up. Not unlike, where are you working out? When are you working out? It's a very similar kind of, if we're thinking about building practice. It's like going to the rec center. But today, again, we're talking about sustainable and sustaining writing practices and researchers. And I'm going to start a little bit with talking about, when we're talking about sustainable, where are we going and what are we talking about? Because a lot of it's, green, right? It's about the environment. It's about what it is that we're doing in terms of our business and work environments. But we're really also talking then about our momentum, our own energy levels when it comes to writing. And we are not infinitely available during the day intellectually. We have these energy levels that we move throughout the day. There are times when we're spot on and we're super smart. We're perhaps even brilliant. We are smarter than we thought we could be. And then there are other times when we're much less so, right? That we kind of stun ourselves, or at least I do, with how not with it we are. And if you're trying to write at a time when you have a low energy level, it's hard to get those words out. It's hard to feel satisfied with that writing practice or that moment of writing and build it into a practice. I also know that when we talk about sustainability, we have to talk about kind of what is sustainable growth. It's kind of can be a way for us to put in or like hide the fact that we're really talking about productivity. We want to be just as productive as ever, but we want to talk about it in a way that's sustainable. And I want us to just be careful with how it is that we're thinking about sustainability here, that this is something that should support the quality of your life overall and who you are as a scholar and researcher within the life that you're building career-wise, but also then right outside of your career and outside of work a day. If we go to the Oxford English Dictionary and we look at the term sustainable, and what is that? It's an adjective, first of all, but it has a couple different key definitions that are ones that we often don't think about, I think. It's capable of being endured or borne or bearable, which just doesn't sound good for creating something that's sustainable for writing, right? That we're capable of enduring our writing. And maybe we're already approaching our writing in some way in that way. But it's also something that can be capable of being upheld or defended as valid or correct. And sometimes I think we get a little, defensive and want to defend our place or space for writing. But really, these are not great senses, underlying senses of a sustainable practice or sustainable writing. In the 1970s, we know that sustainability has a dramatic shift and change and it's being used now as in relation to ecology and economy and looking at human activity and environmental degradation. And it's really the 1972 Wolf Creek Statement that changes how we start thinking about sustainability. But I also want to again think about it in relation to productivity, that we don't have a shift and turn on the definition of sustainability in the 21st century without having had a later 18th and a 19th century of overproduction for us to have to consider what is actually sustainable, what is actually bearable, what can we actually do. And so I think we're hitting that same time period with our era of information technology and what we're expected to produce as scholars and researchers. We ourselves are not computers. We need time to process, to have input, to mull, to consider. That's the great value of the research and the work that we do in our research and scholarship. And so we are not just producing widgets as we produce papers. There's something else going on. And yet, I think that we've also been compelled to produce text really rapidly, right? If you think about the number of emails just alone that you send, per day or per week, and the words that are within those emails and the careful crafting sometimes that goes into those and the intellectual energy that goes into those, that's a fair amount of writing already done. And so that production that we have access to now with output for writing is pretty massive. And it makes sense that we're now talking about something that is what's sustainable for our own writing and our writing practices within this context. Again, these kind of intersecting articulations of what sustainability might be. You can talk about it in 3 pillars. And for some of you, this might be your area and your jam, and you're already thinking about these things or know these terms. For others, it might be thinking about this in kind of a fresh new way, but there are circles of sustainability according to the United Nations. And I like this one a bit, where you can look at economics and the labor and wellness and combine it and look at intersections with culture and how that plays. But I think that we're really talking about something about social sustainability when we talk about writing sustainably, because it's not just down to the individual writer and what their techniques and processes are. On the one hand, yes, I'm going to talk a fair amount about what can you be doing as an individual scholar or researcher in order to become a smoother, more engaged writer, right? But ultimately, it's going to take the collaboration of all of you, the University of New Mexico, through conversations that may happen in environments like this and through Advance, to talk about what's sustainable broadly. What is it that you can sustain and do broadly as an institution? And on the one hand, I think it's probably more than what you think you can do. And I think it may also mean having some conversations about what is productivity, what does it look like? And so I like this definition of social sustainability as a process for creating sustainable, successful places that promote well-being by understanding what people need from the places that they live and work, right? And that there's some sort of infrastructure to support that. And I think the very fact that I'm here talking with you through UNM Advance, that's a sign that you have that going on. All right, so here's a moment for us to have a chat reflection, and that's that first question in the handout. And so my question to you is, what types of writing do you do regularly? What are you regularly engaging in? Where are your fingers to the keyboard or pen to the page most? Yeah, Teresa says scientific papers, emails. Holly says email, social media, articles, blogs, lab manuals. Just look at right. Too many emails, prefer grants, fellowship apps. It's Marigold. Yep, awesome. And says I write email or video mail, manuscripts, email. Yep, emails, papers, emails. Yes, frankly, email. Yep. So Sarah, gosh, yes. Notice how much of that is email. Some of that might be the conditions in which we're working right now amidst a global pandemic and COVID protocols and having, you know, remote work environments, which have amped up the amount of email that we receive and produce. But I think it was on the rise anyway. Lectures, yes. Responding to students' online course discussion. Yeah, a lot of online teaching then that used to be verbal or in person, right? Now is written, reports for grants, scientific papers. Okay, great. So you can get a sense of the commonality of what it is that a lot of you are writing on and what types of text you're producing together. But you can also think then about what's specific to your own type of writing and what you're doing regularly. And that gives you a place to start thinking about what it is that you'd prefer to be spending your time on, or where it is that you want to prioritize so that you produce what it is that you know is contributing most to moving your career, to advancing, right, your career. So thank you for sharing. I'd like us to think about writing a little bit, and depending on what it is that or how you're already defining writing, you may already have these definitions at work and within your toolbox. But I think that writing is one of those things that we often think of as big, and we tend to think of it as the product, as the end result of what it is that we're going to be putting together, and maybe a little bit about our process. But other than that, I think we get a little wonky on thinking about writing and talking about writing. And so if we break it down into 5 Ps for writing, I think it's a little bit helpful. It's helpful for us to be able to identify when we start to struggle or stall out, to identify where it is that we're struggling. So it could be that you're struggling somehow with a genre or something that's field specific. It could also be that you're struggling with something that is the actual putting together of a manuscript or a proposal. That crafting, that has to do with working your data, being able to integrate your data, being able to connect with other work that's been out there, how you're putting that together. The practice, that's largely what we're going to be spending time talking about today, is you and your customary, habitual way of sitting down and getting your writing done. Could also be the project though. I love this, thinking about writing as the project of anything that is moving that grant proposal, that article, manuscript, that whatever it is that you're working on out the door. So anything that's moving it forward. So it could be that you're sending an email, by the way, to a collaborator to be able to get the next revision or to connect and build out something with that project, right? But as long as it's something that's moving the project forward. So when you think about sitting down and doing your writing, if you're thinking about it as, I need to have X amount of time to really dig in and crank out X amount of product or words on the page, that might be too limiting. It might be a limiting way, because sometimes if you're not ready or have the capacity to sit down and write that during the day, it's easy to just put it off and say, well, I'm not ready today, I'll be ready tomorrow. And if you think about your project and what you've got in front of you, you can be working on preparing yourself by reading, crunching some data, getting some things ready for the next session where you can actually generate some content. You can also, by the way, think about writing in relation to your persona, who you are and how it is that you identify as a writer. We know that most of us as academics tend to identify as researchers first, as teachers or instructors maybe second, and writers rarely. I think other things fit in there, like a technician or right, a theorist. Like I think we put a lot of things in there before we identify as writers. Oftentimes we know that writing is a crucial part and probably the largest part of our day. But we tend to think that writers are people who make their living by writing, and or novelists or poets or have a MFA in creative writing, right? So we tend to defer that term writer, that label writer elsewhere. And I'd really like for us to reconsider how it is that we think about ourselves in relation to that word, and thinking about as a title and role that might work for us as a writer, right? So we are researcher writers, we are teacher writers, we are writers. Robert Boyce, a number of years ago, so this is in the 80s and 90s, Robert Boyce was a psychologist, by the way, and he studied writing productivity among faculty writers. He was particularly interested in stalled writers. So a good portion of his work, his research has to do with procrastination, it has to do with writing productivity, and it has to do with binge writing or getting faculty writers out of stalls where they binge and then they stall out, and then they binge and stall out. And his most well-known study is one on busyness and procrastination. And he studied faculty for a year, and he put stalled writers into 3 different groups. And the first group, he said, don't make a change to your writing. Let's just see how much you produce. And that control group, I actually feel kind of sorry for them, right? Like he's just like, well, just do as you're doing and let's see how it goes. And that group produced 17 pages of publishable material in that year, right? That's what it is that they collect, in general put together. The next group, though, he said, write daily, keep a log, and let's see how much you produce. So it's this kind of regular practice to be productive. What can you produce? And that group on average produced 64 pages of publishable material. And then the last group, he said, write daily, keep a log of what you're doing, and be held accountable to someone else who's going to be checking in and making sure that you're setting goals and working to meet those goals. And that group, 157 pages of publishable quality material. And the difference between those is astounding, right? We can see that it's significant. But it also goes to show the power of community in writing, the value of having colleagues for low stakes accountability. So if you're not part of a writing group or a collaboration right now where somebody holds you accountable, consider joining up, starting a writing group. It can make a huge difference. And it's not about being pressured. It shouldn't feel that way. It should be feeling supported, that you have somebody who's checking in with you or you're checking in with them to be able to meet your writing goals. And again, those 3 keys, you're take anything away, right? It's the being able to write daily, log, and be held accountable. And so Robert Boyce's Professors as Writers, that's one of the resources that's listed for you. And that's where we pull away the 3 keys to academic writing productivity. Robert Boyce is also one of the kind of gold standards and base researchers that anybody who's working in academic writing studies goes to look at kind of regular practice. And that 30 minutes a day, that's Robert Boyce's work. And so let's pause for just a moment before we move on, and we're going to talk about other strategies for scheduling out and base habits and habit formation. But I'd like to get a sense from you of what is working well currently in your research writing practice. So feel free to share that in the chat. What's working well? Meetings with mentors. Yep. A writing support group. Facebook, love it. Setting time and location with a protected time on your calendar. Deadlines. Yeah, deadlines work. Yeah. Writing group, 2 hours of writing each morning. Excellent. Mine's a writing group. Opening up files before email. Excellent, Jose. That's a great strategy. You have a group that you meet with once a month. Excellent. Headphones with pump up music. Yep. Good playlists. Rhea, if you've got a good playlist or a Spotify list, you can pop that in the chat too. Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Oh yeah, turning off wireless on your computer. Also really helpful. Good. Those are great strategies. Okay, I'd like to talk a little bit about habit formation and what it is that we know that's out there for academic and research writers. There's not a lot, by the way. Boyce is one of them. Helen Sword is another. Her training is a little bit different. She's trained as a literary critic, and she's in New Zealand now, although I think she's American by birth. And Helen Sword's base habits, this is on your handout as well. There's a little kind of grid on the behavioral, artisanal, social, and emotional. We'll talk about that in a second. But her strategy was to interview 100 successful academic writers to determine kind of how it is that they're successful, how is it that they're writing, and found that the secret to their academic success was not in one specific element of their daily routine, but in a complex cluster of attributes and attitudes. And so if you have this impression that somehow you're not doing it quote unquote right, or that you need to be doing something different, or that you should have this complete, lockdown system, and that it's the half hour every day, and you're not doing half an hour every day, it's actually not necessary. Helen Sword found that people find success in any number of ways. She said that for most people, that daily scheduled writing is neither intuitive as a habit to adopt or an easy one to sustain. So if we're thinking about what's sustainable over time and what sustains us and our writing and writing practice, it may not be that every day you have to do it. If you are, by the way, doing it every day and you're, yes, building out great writing habits, then keep that up. But not everybody's doing that. Few humans possess, according to Sword, the intrinsic self-discipline required to adhere to strictly regimented routine day after day, week after week. And I would also argue that our workaday lives are sometimes our live-a-day lives, particularly during a global pandemic, are not conducive to us having a strictly regimented routine. I think that was one of the things that for a lot of us was so disruptive about having to work from home or shift now into hybrid spaces and things, is that our workaday routines changed dramatically. And so now we have to find new routines. Sword continues, she says, only a few of the writers in her interview sample told her that they adhered to any kind of strict bending same day routine. I think it was around 15-ish% who have an everyday writing practice, which means that 80+% weren't doing that. So Helen Sword took her findings and she looked at what it is that people were telling her, and she looked at, it was a qualitative study, but she looked and broke it down into what is it that people are saying are sustaining them. These are all successful researchers and scholars that she sent queries out to, and she came up with the base habits. And I think this is worth us just spending a little bit of time thinking about what our habits are that sustain us. Talks about behavioral habits. Those are the kinds of ones of discipline and persistence. Those are the ones that we often think of when we're thinking about writing habits. Like, how are we sitting down in the chair, right? Where is it that we're going to work regularly? What times of days are we working? There are also the artisanal habits. These are the ones of style, right? Of craftsmanship, the pride in our work. So we're thinking about like how it is that we're putting the craft, right? How we're putting things together. Social habits, heard a little bit about that in the chat already, of like things that are working for you. And those are your writing groups, your write on site sessions, your connections with mentors and other things. So those social habits of collegiality and collaboration. And then emotional habits of positivity and resilience. And that's the relationship that you have with your project as you're connecting with it. Projects vary, right? We have multiple projects that we're working on, and there are some that we're really engaged with and we really enjoy. And then there are the other ones that are either languishing or that we're avoiding, or that we just, in Jolie Jensen's language, we come to loathe, right? So there are these relationships that can vary across the board. It's not just only one with a relationship that you might have with a writing, but it might be project specific. But what's helpful about this is for us to be able to think then about these habits that we have, where is it that we can choose to spend some time focusing on improvement? I think that the ones that we're already doing well, we often kind of let those go, and doesn't mean that we need to ignore them, but we can set them aside a little bit and just kind of nurture them as needed. But the ones where we know that we're kind of faltering, or the ones that stall us out, or we trip over, this is the place where we can spend and focus some additional time. So again, this is in the handout that you received, and this is a modified version of something that Helen Sword has on her writer's diet website and base habits, and you should have the link in the handout itself. But so I'd like us to think about your current status in these areas. We're not going to do a chat share, but thinking about, where are you with your behavioral habits right now? These are your kind of everyday writing habits. And if I suspect that few of us are at number one, but you never know, right? Like, writing habits, what are writing habits? You're like, I don't know. I seem to be producing what I need to, but I don't know if I've ever developed a habit on this one. Unsatisfactory, are neither good nor bad, pretty good or excellent. And if you're in the range of 4 to 5 on this one, this is probably an area where you're doing pretty good, and you keep going in that direction. If you're 3, 2, or 1, that's a place where you might want to consider doing some work, right? And building in some additional habits. That would be things like regular scheduling, being able to build in time. And we're going to talk about juggling multiple projects as well, because that might actually be part of the challenge too. The artisanal habits, right? Building in some time for document building, style, writing skills. Are those very weak, underdeveloped, neither good nor bad, pretty good, or highly developed? Do you feel really skilled as a writer? Not? Depending on where you are, and you can target very specific things that you would like to do some exercises with. This is, if you think about developing the craft of writing and becoming a writer over the course of your career, you're never done. You're never just finished becoming a writer. And so you can always be improving. And so it might be an area where you can build in some exercises and just start taking care of some of those dangling and misplaced modifiers that have been driving other people crazy for years, or passive and active voice. Just build in some time for that. Yeah. So I'm looking at the chat and catching your questions. So yeah, struggle is in transition, starting new semesters, starting new projects, so that you can get into a great set of habits. But then when things change, it's hard to reset those good habits. Excellent. That's such a great point. We're going to talk about flexible Fernando in a little bit. And I think that's a concept that'll really help with those moments of transition. Your social habits, those are those kind of productive conversations or collegial relationships that you have with your writing and with others. And are they seldom, not often, sometimes, but not deliberate, consistent, as often as possible, or every single day? Just thinking about where it is that you are on that spectrum. And emotional, that's how you're feeling or responding to that writing. And strongly negative, generally more negative than positive, evenly balanced between negative or positive, mostly positive, and positive in every way. So you may be on that spectrum. And again, that can vary from project to project. And Jamie, your question about the base model from Sword's book, it is from Air and Light in Time and Space. So it's the 2017 book. And 2016 is her writer's, if that's her writer's diet, I think that's one. She has a one on style too. But her writer's diet book, by the way, if you are a wordy writer, check it out. If you're looking at strategies for concision, it's awesome. And I do an entire workshop on writer's diet here at CSU now. And so I highly recommend that one too. All right, so chat reflection. What one thing, and just one, would you change about your writing practice? And there's a reason why I'm asking you for just one. But what one thing would you change? Nice. So Sarah, they develop more consistency. More consistency in sitting down, and is it a behavioral thing, or is it more consistency in style and writing? So thinking about that. Warm-up time needed to get started. Yeah, that's a great one. And building in notes and connections between sessions. Sure. Setting aside protected time every day. Your outlook. Yep. Consistency in behavior. Yep, the smoother transitions between projects. So as you move from one to the next. Yep, behavioral habits. Touching writing more frequently. Yep, but not too much pressure in every writing session. Yeah, so then it becomes something that it's sustainable, you can do every day. If there's too much pressure, then we tend to get exhausted and then avoid it. Developing a routine. Developing a habit of daily writing. Making it, yep, writing daily. A good pipeline, multiple projects at different stages. Excellent. Consistency in writing, focusing on one project at a time. Okay, great. And the reason why I ask you for just one is because oftentimes if we sit down and we make a list like we did with all the projects, and you can do that right in that questionnaire, listing all your projects, that's different than listing all of the things that you're like, oh my goodness, how, what do I need to fix about who I am as a writer, or what I need to do in order to get to these projects. And so I think if we keep it to what's the one thing that we really want to focus on changing or improving in our practice, it makes it a lot easier for us. You just narrow it down and say, okay, I'm going to focus on this one thing and improving this, not just for 1 week, not for just 1 month, but for as many months as it takes. And when you start to feel that smooth out, then you pick up the next thing. Like, all right, I've got this one smoothed out. Now what do I want to pick up on and focus on? Because if you try to do them all at once, it's too much and you overload yourself. So you may already feel overloaded with the amount of work that you have on your plate, as well as the number of projects that you have. There's no need for you to overwhelm yourself with the number of changes that you need to be making, right, in order to tackle it. Some of that comes from James Clear's Atomic Habits. I recommend this one pretty consistently. He's pretty well known now. At the time that it came out in 2018, I was doing a fair amount of reading on habit formation, looking at what it is that I could build out for writing workshops and retreats here on campus. And I had avoided Atomic Habits. It was on the stack of summer reading that I had. And I just kept putting it off to the side because I was like, oh, what a crappy title. Oh, it's just, and the book cover, it just didn't appeal to me. And it turns out that it's a really great book. It's, works in this kind of, let's build incrementally. And we know that with habit formation, but he has an approach that if you're looking for a good habit book, just in general, and he doesn't take up writing habits specifically, but just habit formation in general, he's got a good model. And he talks about how you can just start with easy to accomplish writing steps, right? Or you can easy steps, excuse me. He's talking about then bringing things into a specific part of your life, and that you need to just have one little habit, and that as soon as you identify with that and you know that that's part of who you are, then you can move forward. But Clear's point ultimately is, if I'm going to take that, is as a researcher or scholar, you are a professional writer, and writers write regularly. So that means that you're going to be just writing regularly, whatever that looks like. And this is the next place that we're going to go. It's not that it has to be every day, right? Regular is whatever's regular for you. If you want to be writing every day, then that's something that's your goal. That's your kind of focus. And that's something that will bring or enhance the quality of the work that you do and bring pleasure to your life. But regular is not the same for everybody. We have different constraints on our times. We have different projects. We have different personalities. So thinking about regularity in relationship to being engaged with your project so that you can feel that you're making a meaningful contribution, super, super important. And that engagement is kind of the first key. Regular means that you're in touch so that your sessions can build from one to the next. And so if you've started a project and it's your top priority project, that's the thing that you're going to keep in touch with regularly, right? B projects or C projects, and we'll talk about that in a second. Those you might not be as in touch with as regularly, but they're still moving forward. Routine, whatever that routine is just so that you can set it and forget it. So you want that regularity so that your habits become just part of who you are. and that set it and forget it is common language for habit formation, where you get it automated. So it's just the thing that you do when you get up in the morning, right? You go to the coffee pot, you then go and you sit in your writing chair, or it's the thing that you do when you first come into the office in the morning and you open up your computer and you don't turn on your email, right? And then you start writing. Flexibility. This is something that I really want to emphasize in this conversation with you, that flexibility is also so that you can accomplish in multiple things, right, in your life, that it's not just about the writing, that you have multiple life and career projects. This comes from Charlie Gilkey, and he's listed as one of the resources on your guide. It's his book on Start Finishing. And he came out of the military, actually, has his background in military. He's in business. His nonprofit, though, is Productive Flourishing. And I've used his habit formation materials for a while. And I love that he talks about the type of projects that you have in your life, and that you because you don't have unlimited days or hours during a day, that you have to be really choosy with where it is that you're putting your time and attention. And so he talks about having about 5 projects that we can be focusing on and making significant progress on at a time. And if that just kind of caught you off guard, you're like, wait, I probably have 20. Yeah, just think about the categories in which these projects fit. So you can have your writing life, your writing projects, the things that you're moving forward. That can be one area of project. And then you can think about your relationships, right, that you're building out with your partner, with your children. Those are another area of projects. Could be thinking about financial projects. So he takes those, and if you're interested, just look it up. But he talks about project building and kind of a wholeness of your life and a wholeheartedness of your life. And containment. So you want to be able to contain ultimately your writing projects so that something can become regular. It's not regular if you're just leaving it behind, and right, it's abandoned. So it has to be something that you open up, you work on for a little bit, and you close it down, and then you come back to it. And then that's the repetition is what makes it regular. So I want to put out there that I think productivity is the byproduct of our engagement. It is something that it happens because we're engaged and we're producing regularly, but it's because we're engaged with something, not because we're producing. Producing on itself in its own is empty. And so that's kind of the ways that we approach then scheduling and thinking about our habit formation. And Katie Milkman's book, this came out this summer, and it's lovely. It's How to Change, the Science of Getting from Where You Are to Where You Want to Be. And she has a background in engineering, that's her training, and she took that into behavioral and business studies. And so she's really interested in how it is that we make change over time. And so she talks about how habits are like default settings for our behavior. They put good behavior on the autopilot that we can just start writing as we do every day, or as we do every other day, or as we do every Tuesday, Thursday. And again, we'll talk about transitions and what happens at the ends of semesters or new projects and things like that in a moment. But that flexible Fernando comes from Katie Milkman's study. And it's in a chapter on laziness. And she talks about how laziness is something that culturally we eschew, and we say that it's a negative thing. But she says it's a built-in for us to be able to take some time and to rest and recuperate. But also it's something that we can harness to create and build into having good habits. And she says that too much rigidity in habit formation can actually undermine the very system that we're building. So they have done studies largely with people in going to recreation or rec centers and working out for fitness, and looking at those who build in consistent and regular habits, and the ones that are sustaining in those habits, the ones that continue over time. And it turns out it's the people who are not too rigid. They call them the rigid Rachels, are the people who have like, they do something at the same time every day for X amount of time. But it's more the flexible Fernandos, the people who know that they're going to be showing up, 3 times a week or 4 times a week at the gym, and they're kind of flexible. And when it is that they're going to get there, they just know that they're going to get there. Those habits are actually stronger and more sustaining. So for me, that's relevant because in thinking about writing practices, because when are we showing up? How are we showing up? And is it the same time every day or is it a different time? Right. And so just knowing that you're going to be showing up may be the way that you build it into your schedule. Doesn't mean you're unaware, and doesn't mean that you're starting every day anew going, I wonder where writing's going to fit in. It means that you're approaching it flexibly so that when you schedule out your time, whether that be for the week, the month, or the semester, that you're being flexible every time you're approaching that, and that you know that writing is going to fit in there. And so where it helps with transitions, I think in approaching this habit formation is flexibly, approaching it flexibly, how's that? That you can then build in transition times. You know that you're going to be taking some time off. It's not going to be the end of your project. It's going to be kind of a hiatus, and you can plan for that. You can say, okay, I know I'm going to be taking some days off here, and I'm going to leave myself some good notes, and then I can get back to my project when I return and build and keep that habit going in new ways. So it's not all lost if you think about it being flexible. So project proliferation is real. We have many, many, many projects. Some of us take on not just more projects than that we can do in our lifetime, probably, but some of us are also just project proliferators, that one begets another, begets another, begets another. And I just mentioned Charlie Gilkey's emphasis on projects being something that's not just about a writing project or a business project, right? It's a research project, that it is, you have multiple life projects that are ongoing, and you can talk about career, family, finances, fitness, legacy, or contribution. But as we move in and thinking about just our writing projects, we also know that we have limited focus, and the energy that it takes to move something forward, we want to be careful with that. So we need to select carefully. We usually do that by prioritizing based on deadline or who's pressuring us for what at a given time, right? And so having 3 projects per week is a great place to go. And for me, by the way, who I am a proliferator, I find the 3 projects rule really, really helpful. It just takes some weight off of my shoulders. The feeling that I need to be obligated to be working on 5 projects a week or 6 projects a week, I just know that really the reality is that I can focus on 3, move those forward. As soon as something drops off of your plate, even if it drops off midweek, send something in, your deadline is done, right? Then you can move something else onto your 3 projects. You move projects in, but you only need to have 3 projects going at a time. It helps you focus your attention. Yeah, 3 projects total for writing. So these are life projects. These are writing projects. And so you can take that career area of where it is that you're moving things forward, and know that your writing projects are part of that larger project that you're working on. Your 3 writing projects are kind of a mini category or a breakdown. And that's where things start to proliferate. We can see that we are building research careers, but that is housed or contains X number of projects that will continue to grow, right? We'll continue to add projects, but those projects will also have X number of writing projects. They'll either have proposals that go with them and abstracts that go with it. So there's multiple projects that can be coming out of the writing projects that can come out of the broader category of projects. But each week, focusing on just 3, that's the key, because it allows for you then to narrow down and keep just one project at a time, the main focus. For those of you who are juggling multiple projects, just keep it, if you can, 3 a week. And then if you complete project A, that moves off, then you can move another one in, but only 3 on deck at a time. And then 1 project that you're focusing on in a moment, because again, you can't focus on 3 different projects. Multitasking is really hard. Yeah, it's not very effective. So scheduling for sustainable engagement. This is a Neil Fiore method, and he was at Berkeley for a long time and went into private practice. He worked though with graduate students and faculty there in the 80s and 90s, and built out something that's called an unschedule method. And he's most well known for talking about procrastination in a similar way that Robert Boyce was. But what I like about Neil Fiore's model is that he helps us understand how we can build in guilt-free time, or time that is for our other life projects, right? Career is one area, research is one area perhaps for you that has all of these other projects that are housed within it, writing projects that are housed within it. But our lives are so full that 168 hours, right? That accounts for all kinds of other things too, and we want it to. So if you're feeling that pressure of, I don't have time to write, but I don't have time for my family, and I don't have time to rest, and I don't have time, Neil Fiore is great for being able to kind of shut down some of that internal discourse and dialogue, and for you to kind of shift it so that you can think, okay, well, this is what I'm capable of doing. This is what I choose to do. This is how I'm going to do it during this week, and set aside the time for it. He talks about prioritizing project time by scheduling in guilt-free time first. And we'll take a look at some of the models. And then you set and add your set obligations like meetings, picking up kids, and other things. So guilt-free time when you know that you don't want to be working, you want to be doing other things. Maybe it's really, really flexible. You don't know what you want to be doing with that time yet. But then you schedule in all of your project time. That's how you prioritize. I know it sounds backwards. It sounds like you should start with the prioritizing your writing time and fit that into your schedule, and then build in everything else around it. But emotionally, it's really helpful to know that you have all of this other time to be doing the things that you want to be doing and need to be doing, right? And that protecting your writing time, this is that section. This is the only section that you have for writing. So if you look at a weekly calendar that has 168 hours in it, for example, you could go through and just cross off all the times that you know that you don't want to be writing. That's all the areas shaded in black. And then see what's left. And in those areas, be able to pick a handful of times that you know that are good for you to be writing. Think about the good time of day where you have good energy levels, perhaps. So setting aside 3 2-hour blocks, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So you teach on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and you know your brain is kind of elsewhere. Your high intellectual energy goes to creating lectures or to doing other projects, and you know that you're just really not going to be available. Then you can build in additional times or see what's left for Saturday. Maybe there's a couple hours there on days where you know that you're pressed or you're behind schedule and you need to add in some more. You may have some time later on in the day on Tuesdays and Thursdays that you can devote to writing, but it's not always going to be there. So you have office hours, right? 10 to 11 on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, that you might not be able to continue writing, but you could continue writing, but you can't count on it. So maybe it's a flickering time. So being pretty flexible with thinking about where it is that you can build in writing is also helpful, that it doesn't have to be rigid, that it can be there additional times, flexible times. And this would give you about 8 hours of writing time per week, which is pretty good. 10 hours is awesome. And really, if you think about the number of hours that we are spot on and have great intellectual energy, right? Like our capacity, we've got a couple hours a day, and that's it. So it's best if you can funnel that into your writing projects. Again, I mentioned Neil Fiore's The Now Habit, and this is from his scheduling recommender model. And he's got, things like sleep still, right? Want to go to the beach on a Sunday, having dinner. So building in all the things that you want to be doing that are not writing related, that are your guilt-free time, super helpful. And particularly if you have a habit of procrastination. And I do say that procrastination is a habit that you can break and you can retool. But if you're feeling that if you're consistently putting things off and then feeling relief when you're not doing them, that's probably a habit reward system that having some guilt-free time scheduled in first would help with. And Fiore reminds us that one of the reasons why we procrastinate is because we fear that if once we start working, that there'll be no time for play, that work will deprive us of play and enjoyment in our life. And that guilt-free play offers us a way around that problem by insisting that you plan in recreation into that schedule. and that making play a priority in your life is part of learning to overcome procrastination. So what happens when you have multiple projects, that 3 projects per week? I think Christine Tully, she wrote How Writing Faculty Write. She did interviews with composition faculty and looking at how they both teach writing and how it is that they actually themselves are writing regularly. And she works with a 3-project rule for the week and has different scheduling models that I really like. And you can have projects A to Z, right? You can have 20 projects or more that you're working on, but not all within 1 week. So that's why the 3 projects ABC per week. And this would be a model of how it is that you have regular writing every single day for a couple hours, perhaps. Project A gets that priority time. Maybe you have additional time elsewhere, right? Project B time. And you can see where it is that your project C might only get a half an hour here or there, but at least you're touching base with it. So earlier when we talked about keeping things regular and whatever that regular routine looks like for you, this would be something where you have a regular writing routine where priority, project A is your priority project and that gets that priority time. But then you also have other times where you're touching base with those projects. If you find that touching base with your 3rd project, project C, between Tuesday and Sunday is not enough time for you to keep it moving forward, you might want to make some adjustments or just have an A and B project for that week. But it could also be that you're setting things up with your project C, knowing that that will take over a spot once you move project A out, and that you'll then have more time to work on it the subsequent week, that you'll work on it later. So if you have an arrangement where you have bookended days, or you can build in significant time, morning and afternoon, a couple days per week, but you have less time, right? Less availability. So you're teaching on these days, you know that you're just not going to be as sharp. Build in that time for your second project, project B, and maybe a couple hours or an hour or so on Sunday for your project C. Keeping it in mind, right? Keeping yourself flexible with all of the projects, moving them through. Here's another model where you would be writing every day, perhaps. And in that model, you can focus most of your time on your project A and then work on project B or project C at the end of those other sessions. This is what Cal Newport calls a journalistic model for writing, where it's for those of you who are well established and knowledgeable in your field, that you know what you're writing about when you sit down, that it's pretty available. If you think about a journalist, and our kind of stereotypes of journalists is that they come rushing into the newsroom and they crank something out for a few minutes and then they've got it there, that you would be able to drop in and just crank it, for about half an hour, then leave, go do something else, come back, crank a little bit more, right? So this is a journalistic model. And Cal Newport says that he, I think he achieved associate professor before he felt comfortable working within a journalistic method or system. And this is one of the last things that I'm going to share with you before we open it for questions and broader comments and conversation. But I highly recommend that regardless of whether scheduling you use or how it is that you're building in your habits and focusing, that you find a way to contain your writing. And this comes from Jolie Jensen talking about it, having a project box. And if you have 3 projects going, it's really nice to be able to open one project box and then close it down, open another project box, close it down, right? So you know what you're working on and when you're working on it. And it could be a physical box, which is a great cue, right? You have that physical, your body moves the box open, right? And then closes it when you're done. So you can be like, project A open, project A closed, project B open, project B closed. But most of us are working in a digital space. And so we use digital files. And so you could have an electronic project box that is as a separate user or a separate computer. It could be also separate files, whatever it is that your system and your routine is, that's going to be part of your habit and your habit formation of, this is me opening my project and working on it for a little bit, and this is me closing it down. And I say this, and I recommend this as somebody who has on my work computer, tons of tabs open, dings and, email, other things. So I also have a separate computer for my writing, and that's my morning project A writing box or project box. And that's what I open up. It's an older computer. It's my former computer, and it's heavier. So it's actually has a different weight to it. The laptop, it feels different. The keyboard feels different. And so that's my writing space. It's part of my routine. Eventually, I'll have to get it. I'm sure that computer will not last forever. So eventually I'll be changing up some of those, but a lot of those habits I will carry over, and they're related very much to the box that I'm using, the container that I have. That's part of my ritual for being able to open up and close down my writing space. Again, that comes from Jolie Jensen and her Write No Matter What, which I just think is fabulous for being able to talk about getting unstuck from writing stalls. She herself is an academic. She was raised in an academic family, and she talks about the things that we do internally that stall us out for our writing. But she points out that satisfied academic writers have frequent, low stress, highly rewarding encounters with a project that they enjoy. And so that is my wish for you. I hope that you have, after this session, brief, frequent, low stress, and highly rewarding encounters with a project that you enjoy. So I'm going to put up here, this is my contact information. Feel free to reach out if you have questions or want to have a few more recommendations. I've got plenty. And I'm just grateful to be here and to be able to talk with you, and grateful to Matt, Julia, and for Ellen Fisher for introducing us. And there's information and you can reach out to Advance at UNM as well. So now I'm going to open it up for questions and stop sharing my screen so we can have a conversation.
So please feel free to put questions in the chat, or put up your hand, or just start talking. Jamie.
Hey, thank you so much. That was a great way for me to sort of wrap up my week, so I don't feel so guilty over the weekend when I have my prioritized playtime. I guess one of the things that I've really struggled with in terms of just thinking about structure and scheduling is it feels like I never really know how to game out my plan. And part of two of the disrupting factors for me when I think about scheduling my writing projects, one is things will come back at me. I'll have an R&R or something that wasn't part of what I was thinking, and that sort of throws things out of whatever the plan is. And the other is that I am somebody who has to stack all the aspirational goals up and to be a little bit unattainable, so that I derive some motivation from having to work really hard to get them going. And I guess I just never figured out how to keep it super simple. What that translates to is I think I'm going to get through things a lot faster than I do. And so I often will write out, I started with the NCFDD planning, and I would spend 2 days at the beginning of a semester coming up with this wonderful plan that by day 5 is wrecked. And I'm really curious about how people come up with fail-proof plans, if there is such a thing, or just better, more fail-proof.
Yeah, I think that's the challenge with Gantt charts, right? That you set up this great flow chart, and then as you point out, day 5, you're already off schedule and things have gone awry. So on the one hand, I think it's a continual reminder from yourself not to be too tied to the plan, and to be able to be flexible enough to rework the plan as you need. I think that's one of the things that I really like about agile scheduling. And there's actually a book by Rebecca, and I'm blanking on her last name, called Agile Faculty. And she takes you through using agile software generation techniques for building out your own projects. And that might be something that you want to try, because you're checking in with yourself every 24 hours, every week, and you're kind of readjusting as you need to. I think the challenge, though, also with you said something about aspirational and kind of the aspirational goals and things. And it does remind me of Teilhard de Chardin, who said, your goals should be grand enough to get the best of you. And that on the one hand, you want to be aspirational in that way, but you also want to feel like you're making good progress on those aspirations. And if you feel like you're continually flubbing or faltering, or it means that there's just something off with your system. I don't think it's you. There's just something off with how you're planning it out and how you're thinking about that plan. And so I would try out agile methods and see if that's something like regular checking in and being a little bit more flexible can feel good. For me, the thing that, and I've been doing this for years and years now, but the thing that has made a huge difference for me is the 3 project rule, which is one reason probably why I emphasize it so much, because I'm like, it's so great. I only have 3 projects per week. But my writing partner is in civil and environmental engineering, and she's so much more practical than I am. And I'm like, I've got all of these things, and we've been working together for 3 years. And consistently she tells me, I don't think you're going to make it through all 10 of those goals this week, right? Like, so it's a long time. If you've got habits that have been in place that have served you and that you've been found success with, it is really hard to shift and change some of those habits, because I think my instinct was, no, but I need to be working on 10 things. I'm not going to be making progress if I'm not working on 10 things. And actually, she's, taught me over time. And yes, that less is probably more. I don't know if does that help? Yeah. Tara, see your hand up.
Hi, hang on. Hi, thanks for a great talk. I had a question. I don't actually know if it's if you'll be able to help or not, but I thought maybe in your capacity at CSU, or maybe somebody else in the audience will have an answer for this, because for me, writing is a little bit different than I've seen it described here or in many of the books out there on, how to get a good writing practice as a professor. So I'm an experimental physicist. And so for me, writing most of the time between now and when I get a paper is doing research in lab. Mm-hmm. And, but it's not, I don't, it's hard to think of it as like research and then a paper. Actually, it's more like, okay, plan the paper and then do the research and then write it up and then oops, go back and try again with the research and then write a little bit more. Do you have any good ways of thinking about that when the writing isn't just, oh, block out some time for writing, but it's, I guess for have you ever helped any, experimental scientists in this capacity?
For sure. And in fact, I worked with one of our NSF Career Award winners is a physicist that we worked together in a group with 2 chemists, and it's highly successful. So yes, I think it sounds to me like the iterative process for you it's like a kind of perhaps back and forth, even from the very beginning. And that's a dynamic process that you need to have as being flexible. So in that if we think going back to flexible Fernando, for you means that also just being aware and building in writing as it works for you in the day. And if I think that's one of the challenges that I've had with voice as well, and the models for half an hour per day, because they can be quite rigid. What I really like about Helen Sword is that she's much more flexible herself in saying that you don't have to do that in order to be able to be a successful writer. If there's something, however, underneath, it sounds to me like in your experience of writing that it feels less satisfying or that it's not working for you, that's the place where you can kind of pinpoint and start tinkering or playing around and building in something that might be different. So I don't know exactly, without kind of working with you or talking with you a little bit more, perhaps hearing like underneath what's going on, but the kind of back and forth of having a lab and having to do writing, it's very common. It is part of the writing process. And And so I don't think it's as different as you might be thinking of it even.
I see. I can be, yeah, very literal minded. Maybe I should ask a more specific question. I've looked at a lot of the books that you have recommended, and I found some interesting things in a lot of them. But have you come across a book that's more geared towards, you know, faculty writing when they're in the experimental sciences?
Yeah, so it sounds to me like you're actually looking for a book that uses language and discourse and even metaphors or descriptions that would kind of reflect back to you your own working space. And because I think a lot of the practices or the strategies are very similar, but how it is that we connect with them within our workspaces may be different, which would be why it is that you would want to have examples of bench work, lab, work, or I'm not sure what your lab looks like and how it is that you're working, but you would want to have something that takes into account those examples or discourses. So there's a Chicago book out there that might be worth looking into for science writers. A couple others. So feel free to email me.
Okay. All right. Great. I will. Thank you.
Other questions? Oh, Ellen, you can jump in if you want.
I was just, I had to step out to help a student for a second, so apologies if this question has been asked already. But on the kind of takeaway for the write daily log and be held accountable, is there like some worksheets or tools we can use to like kind of set up an accountability framework with like a writing group or something like that? And could you talk more about exactly like, logging, like kind of what Tara was saying, like, logging for science writing, doing experiments? It could be, well, I did an experiment today for this, or is it word count, or is it page number, or like the rigidity of that?
Yeah, I would say go with whatever works best for you. Try them out. If you're looking at generating content, if you know that you tend to avoid generating content, then going with something like word count might be great. Word count is not helpful for me. In part because when I start to edit, then I feel like I've lost count for the day. Like, how many words have I generated? I don't know. I took away 35 or, so word count is one of the ways that you can do it. You can do it in terms of time and duration. If that's one of the things that you want to start building in, is greater time in the seat for working, regular routine. So you can do timing. You could do project-based, how much of a section of a project you can track. There are any number of ways, but the key thing is to be tracking and logging what days you're showing up, what project that you're working on, and then what next steps you need to be taking. And for me, I've tried electronic resources or Excel spreadsheets. And a lot of people use them, like Patricia Goodson, her book on 50 exercises for academic writers. She's got a great model in there that she uses of an Excel spreadsheet on tracking time and projects. For me, those electronic apps or Excel spreadsheets don't work very well. And so my writing journal or my writing log is literally a journal. It's a Moleskine, and I track what I'm moving forward, what I'm writing, and what my next steps are. And that's the thing that keeps me aware of where I am on what project, how many projects I've got going. And it looks pretty messy, actually. So I think there's something too neat and clean about Excel spreadsheets that I can't do it. But if Excel is your thing and your jam, there's some great models out there. You can even email me. I've got some great ones from the Textbook and Academic Authors Association that I recommend.
And for accountability, do you share your logs with others then, or is that like kind of, like how do you get accountability like in a like for someone like me, an assistant professor, I guess?
Depends on the system that you're setting up. My writing group partner and I, for example, have a Google Doc. And at the beginning of every semester, we write down our goals of what it is that we want to accomplish throughout the semester. And then we have weekly meeting times. And at each weekly meeting, we cover what it is that we want to accomplish in the next week and what it is that we did accomplish on the past week. And we color code things. Her system's slightly different than mine, but it all still fits on our table in the Google Doc. So it's not really sophisticated. I think that most of what it is that we need in order to be tracking and moving our writing projects forward is really basic, really simple. And I did a workshop on writing strategies, methods, and tools at the start of the beginning of our semester here for our faculty and graduate students. And my key recommendation was keep it simple. Just anything that's going to keep you aware, low stakes, but still that kind of brief, frequent, and highly rewarding, really helpful. And it can be a Moleskine journal or it can be a Todoist app.
Can I jump in just a little bit?
Yep.
Because I've done a lot of work with teaching graduate students about writing and things like that. So I think both to Tara and Ellen's points about this, sounds funny when I say my own name to Ellen. That there's a couple things that I can throw out there as tools that have worked really well, both for me and for graduate students. And one in terms of writing, like with experiments, and I put some of this in the chat, but that idea of saying, I'm doing an experiment because I'm going to do that. I want this figure for my paper. And then to have the writing be associated with doing a figure caption and doing an extended figure caption. And then that starts to give you the results for the paper and that kind of thing. So there's some things like that that are really kind of cool exercises for thinking about how am I maximizing my time in the lab, for example, but also then I have a figure, and then if I have to write a figure caption for it for the paper, but then do it as an extended one, and then that sort of becomes your the results section of the paper as you collect the figures for the paper on a particular project. So that could count as writing time or writing progress, right? And then the other piece of advice that I will give is that with my research group over the years, I started doing every January, we have a sort of what's our goal, a goals group meeting, and we would come up with a list of papers that we want to submit. And then 6 months into the year, we would also do that. But we would just come up with a list and have, either the title if it was far along, or just what the general subject matter was. And this was literally just a Word document. And then there'd be like, who are the key writers that would be responsible for the writing? And then what journal were we thinking about sending it to? And then the estimated date of submission. And then the last column was the actual date of submission. And so every year we were able to go through this, always aspirational. So to that person who said, I really want aspirational goals, I would come up with a list of a dozen papers a year. And I never submitted 12 papers in 1 year. Okay. But I sometimes had 17 papers on it. But the accountability piece is also built into that for the whole group, because everybody could see what everybody was working on. We would check in on it periodically, usually at least once a year, but sometimes more frequently than that. And I just kept that running list of, when we actually submitted it. And then we also got to talk about how sometimes your goals change and you don't always hit the deadlines because other things come up and things like that. So that's another accountability methodology that works when you're running a research group that has students in it that also have writing that has to be done. So
I love it. Yep. Other questions? Comments?
I will just throw out there that when I was a department chair, I tried to set up people from across different departments who I thought might be compatible as assistant professors as sort of accountability partners. You can, as Kristina's saying, you don't have to have an accountability group. You can have an accountability partner. A group can sometimes be good, but if you find one person that you kind of connect with, they can become an accountability partner. My favorite group I set up when they were assistant professors, they're now full professors, and continue to interact regularly. When they were assistant professors, they get together approximately every week. And sometimes it was to go, really? You didn't even bother to figure out what the journal requirements was? Come on, that was your goal. Or sometimes it was just to discuss the challenges of being an assistant professor. But when they were associate professors, they informed me that yes, right now it's an accountability and writing group. Once we are full professors, it will be a drinking group. Aspirational, which, and now they are. But think about the accountability piece flexibly too. It can be one other person. Or you can try and find, several people, but there's a lot of different ways to think about it. But I think Kristina said the key thing, it's about support, not pressure. So it shouldn't be someone or some people that you dread meeting with. It should be, okay, I will feel less stressed about this. Even if I'm going into it not having hit my goals, I will feel better at the end of this check-in.
Agreed. I love that it became the drinking group. And that was, yes, that's aspirational, but yeah, I love it. Sarah mentioned the key thing that you found in accountability groups is that everyone needs to have the same level of commitment to writing. One person cannot pull along. Yep. So there needs to be mutuality. It only works if you have peers who are equally committed or equally struggling. That can be true. Yes. I agree with the equally committed. Equally struggling, I don't know. That one's a little trickier for me to see, because I think that people have different struggles at different times, and that if we're all there committed and to support one another, that can shadow because the equally struggling is the kind of misery loves company, and that we all have something in common because we're struggling in the same kind of way. Yeah. Or you just can't have one person struggling to get committed. Now I get it. Yep. Or the others, yeah, to be really on it. Yeah, exactly. So there needs to be that common vision. So this goes to Ellen Martinson's earlier comment or question about best practices for writing groups. And there are some out there. There are some great guides, but many of them are about getting the group on the same page and making sure that you have some basic rules in place for what it is that the group is doing and why you're getting together. And so it's really helpful to have, we have about, I think it's 10 questions that you ask of your writing group partners when you gather. And it's as simple and kind of practical as, when are we meeting? How regularly are we meeting? What topics are available for our conversation? Are we strictly focusing on writing, or are we doing something more that's professional support for one another? And some groups want to keep it just strictly to the writing, and others want to have it be, as Julia points out, a little bit broader and a little bit more kind of academic, professional support conversations. And so in that, you can also have things like, are we going to exchange writing? What happens if somebody doesn't show up for a week or two? How do we deal with that? What happens if somebody does not feel supported in the writing group, and how are we going to address that at the time? And just making sure that people know in that space that the first goal is to support one another and to be committed. And I think those kinds of agreements, not unlike the kind of agreement that you might set up with a graduate student, or kind of a version of your IDP for your group, or your writing agreement that you would be, like who gets credit for what. It's not legally binding, but it would be a great way to set the tone for the group and set some guidelines early on. That way you have something to fall back on when things start to go sideways or aren't creating the kind of group that you want to have.
We have one last question or comment before we thank Kristina. All right, well, thank you, Kristina, very much for spending part of your Friday afternoon with us. I really appreciate it. And thank you everyone else for joining us. And I will say,